Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining this ReferKent Spotlight session with Citizens Advice North West Kent. Delighted to have George Banfield join us this morning to talk. What I would ask, just a final reminder, if people just keep microphones on mute whilst George is presenting to avoid any background noise. The Q&A function is enabled, so please do feel free to use that. Over to George without any further ado. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you very much for coming, everyone. Yes, my name's George. I'm one of our energy advisors here at Citizens Advice in North and West Kent. We currently have a team of 6 advisors, and we're currently running a number of projects to try and help people with any sort of issues with their energy situation. So before I get into that, I just want to speak a little bit about sort of what we do as an organisation, as in Citizens Advice in North and West Kent. So we're one of a number of Citizens Advice offices in Kent and indeed throughout the country. We provide free, independent, confidential and impartial advice to anyone who needs it. Those are kind of the 4 key pillars of what we do, and same for any Citizens Advice office. Of course, we try to deal with any inquiry that comes through the door. Obviously, there are some things that we have to refer on, and of course, we don't do legal advice or financial advice. We're not qualified to do that. But we do have sort of a number of main inquiry areas that we tend to see. Those things being sort of things along the lines of debt, benefits, housing, employment, immigration. And obviously a key one that we'll be talking about today, energy, which I think a few years ago probably wouldn't have been so high up on the list, but given the way things have been over the last 3 or 4 years, it's become sort of quite an area where we're seeing quite a lot of queries and people who need help. In terms of sort of where we cover, and this is just Citizens Advice in North and West Kent. So our areas are Dartford, Gravesham, Sevenoaks, Tunbridge and Malling and Tunbridge Wells. Just an important thing to mention as well within Sevenoaks is that there is an independent Citizens Advice in Edenbridge and Westerham who cover that part of Sevenoaks. But we cover the rest. And on occasion we may go further afield, but as I'll show you on with a little map in a moment, there are sort of each kind of area of Kent has its own independent Citizens Advice office, and I think for the sake of sort of making sure that we're not kind of running into each other's areas, we try to just sort of manage the area that we're in. Yeah, so you can see those are the areas we cover. Obviously, there's a part of Sevenoaks that will be covered by Edenbridge and Westerham. As I said, these are the areas we cover. There's a little bit of Sevenoaks that is covered by Edenbridge and Westerham, and the other areas of Kent will have their own Citizens Advice offices. And I'll speak a bit about that in a moment in regards to energy. But let's just start off by talking about the current energy situation in the UK. Because we're seeing now, obviously with a lot going on in the world, that and also with things not being quite as severe as they were a couple of years ago, the cost of living crisis and sort of high energy costs, that sort of thing, are now sort of off the front pages. So things aren't quite as bad as they were in, say, 2022, 2023. I mean, I think those of us who were working on energy advice at the time will all remember the winter of 2022-23. But despite it not being sort of as newsworthy as it used to be, energy prices still remain stubbornly high, and it's still affecting a lot of people. And of course, if people are having to pay a lot for energy, it doesn't just it's not just a case of affording that, but it's also got the knock-on effects of affecting how they afford other things. And just to give you sort of a rough idea of how things have changed. So if we look back at sort of the winter of 2021-2022, when we were just sort of coming out of the sort of the kind of the main time of COVID and the lockdowns, the price cap around then was such that for an average household, and I think by Ofgem's metrics, the average household is 2.5 people, but they would have sort of had or it's estimated that based on their usage, the price cap would have been about £1,216 per year. Now, the price cap for the same household using the same amount of energy would be £1,738 per year. So it's an increase of more than £500 over the course of a few years, which still, even with the sort of inflation issues we've had, I believe it's still far above that. Just some statistics just to sort of back that up as well. According to Ofgem, we still have a situation here where there are 806,508 households or it's estimated that there are 806,508 households in the UK with debt on their electricity account and 656,545 households with debt on their gas account. Which and of course some of those people are going to have debt on both, so it doesn't necessarily mean that would sort of, those are sort of separate households, but you can see there's still a serious issue there with the sort of the total consumer energy debt in the UK now rising as high as 3.82 billion, and it's going up. In fact, it's been, if you look at the sort of the way it's risen, it's pretty much just a direct line up over the last few years, and obviously you can look into that in more depth on Ofgem's website. There's very much still sort of quite a serious issue here. Now, in terms of what we look for with the clients that we deal with, we look at sort of fuel poverty, and there are two different definitions for fuel poverty. We tend to use the one that National Energy Action have. So they say that a household is in fuel poverty if it needs to spend 10% or more of its income on energy in order to maintain a satisfactory heating regime. And I think what we mean by that is, or what NEA mean by that, I should say, is obviously there'll be some people who will, or certainly that we deal with, who are so concerned about their energy costs that they just try to, they don't use any heating at all, even in the middle of winter. And they sort of they kind of take extreme measures, which would sort of keep them out of fuel poverty. We would say those people would still be sort of in a situation of extreme poverty, fuel poverty, I should say. And according to that definition, National Energy Action estimate there are actually 6.5 million people in fuel poverty in the UK, which is about, if I've got my maths right, it's about 10% of the population, which is obviously an extremely high amount. As I mentioned earlier, it causes difficulties not only paying the energy bills, but then if you're spending more of your money on energy bills, it then also has a knock-on effect. I mean, we've all heard of the difficulties people have had between choosing between heating and eating. And even if it's not quite as extreme as that, it still affects their ability to afford other things and other essentials. So that's sort of one way of defining fuel poverty. The other ways is the way the UK government defines fuel poverty. So they define it as where a household is living in a property with a fuel poverty energy efficiency rating of band D or below, in a home that cannot be kept warm at reasonable cost without bringing their residual income below the poverty threshold. Now, and this is something that's really being looked at as well now with the energy efficiency ratings for properties, especially those that are sort of either privately rented or rented from a housing association or rented from the council. There's sort of this legislation that's come in, or I know it's been watered down a bit, to try and get the energy efficiency rating, all those properties, I believe, up to C. And obviously from the point of view of the UK government's definition of fuel poverty, that should help bring a lot of people out. But according to that definition, if you look at the statistics that are freely available on gov.uk, there are almost 90,000 households in Kent in fuel poverty. So that's sort of 11.5% of the total households in Kent. So again, a huge number of people who sort of would be classed as in fuel poverty and who are struggling and need a bit of help with that. So it's still, very much in a situation where sort of people need help when it comes to energy advice and sort of ways to reduce their energy costs, maximize their income, that sort of thing. So just talk about sort of what we've done. I'll talk about our projects we run in a moment. But just to go through sort of the main issues that people have spoken to us about, and this is just for 2024. So obviously a key one, obviously, would be a difficulty affording energy costs. And sort of what goes hand in hand with that usually is ways to reduce their usage through behavior change, and it can also mean sort of not just changing behavior, but sometimes changing appliances they have if there's sort of one that's faulty, that sort of thing. We always try and focus on this because in many ways it's often the easiest way for people to reduce their usage, although of course often people with the sort of the highest usage or most usage issues, there's usually a limited amount we can do with that, but we do always focus on sort of reductions in usage through behavioral change. Another key one is for people is sort of helping them understand energy bills, and that goes right to sort of talking them through how their sort of kilowatt hour usage translates across to what they're paying. I think that it probably says a lot that we sometimes get people who come to us with sort of £400 a month bills, and their sort of experiences, that's just normal, and we have to obviously talk to them about that. So that's sort of a key one, and sometimes for some people just understanding their bill is enough to help them make the changes they need to get them into the right place. I recall in one case in particular, we had somebody who thought they were paying a sort of a 1,500 month bill, and we actually help them understand that was actually their annual projection. So that's very important. Something else that's sort of coming coming back to us more is sort of questions about changing tariffs and suppliers, because of course there was a long time where that wasn't possible, or where most energy companies weren't providing any other tariff other than the standard variable one. When I started working in energy advice, which would have been 2019, I'd say most of our queries were to do with changing supplier or changing tariff. And now we're seeing that starting to come back, which is probably a good sign. It shows that people are sort of becoming more aware that they can save money by doing that, and B, it shows that the energy companies are maybe more confident and more willing to offer that sort of thing. And on the note about energy companies, I mean, the other big issue we have is customer service issues and complaints. And from our perspective, we obviously will always try and help people get those resolved. In some cases, we'll even go as far as sort of going down the energy ombudsman route with them, and hopefully getting a result that is satisfactory. Although, of course, we'd only go down the energy ombudsman route if we thought it was necessary. So we'll sort of help clients go down that route as sort of as much as they need to go down, or as long as we feel that it's that they're making a reasonable complaint and all of that. Then another key one is energy debt. So this often goes hands in hands with the customer service complaints as well. So if that's when it comes to energy debts, we look at either or people come to us with issues either disputing the debts or looking at options to resolve the debts. Obviously, if they're looking at options to resolve the debt, it does start to go into the realm of debt advice, and if there are other debts as well, we'd certainly just refer them on. If it is just an energy debt, because I'm also a trained debt advisor as well as an energy advisor, we might sort of deal with that on the energy side. But that is a key issue, and as sort of alluded to in the earlier slide, it's an issue that's becoming more prevalent rather than going down, even with sort of the cost of living issues and then the inflation issues becoming less severe. Then another thing that we have to deal with, but probably not as much as some people might think we have to deal with, is smart meter issues. Now, whenever I go out and give a talk, I always get heckled by somebody who's, when I bring up smart meters, I always get heckled by somebody who's had some kind of issue with a smart meter. And we are still seeing issues with them, especially in rural areas or areas with poor mobile connectivity. I mean, the number one issue basically is the smart meter not connecting, or the in-home display not connecting, which it's not the end of the world, because usually the meter will just work like a sort of an old style meter, even if the sort of you don't get the benefit of the smarts part of it. But of course, it is still an issue, especially with the way that they're sort of pushed quite a lot by the energy companies now. So we do have to deal with quite a few smart meter issues, although, as I said, maybe not as many as some people might think we do. I'd say probably the majority of clients we see who have a smart meter generally aren't having any problems with them. Then there's also sort of queries about changes of payment method, and we're seeing quite a lot recently where people actually are wanting to go onto a prepayment meter. Often they'll have been paying through sort of on receipt of the bill or through a direct debit, and they'll find they just can't afford it, or they find it difficult to monitor what they're spending or what they're using with their energy. And that's led to something which I think is a really interesting sort of irony that we've seen, because again, I'm sure those who've been sort of working on the energy side will remember a couple of years ago or so, we had a real issue with energy companies forcibly installing prepayment meters for people who had energy debts, but also people who really actually shouldn't have had prepayment meters installed due to capability issues. And obviously there's legislation brought in around that. We now have a strange alternative problem where people who want prepayment meters aren't able to get them, and obviously that's being remedied with smart meters, because you can because the energy company can sort of switch them between credit and prepayment mode fairly easily. But I've had a number of clients on a number of occasions who have said, who've had a debt and said, look, a prepayment meter would make it easier for me to manage my money. Please could we contact the energy company and ask to have one? And so we contact the energy company, and they've said, well, we don't have any. And then they said we'll try and get them back in touch as soon as we can once we have them available. And while we're waiting for that, in the meantime, the client will get a letter from the energy company saying, if you don't pay up your debt within this time period, if you don't make a payment plan, we will come and install a prepayment meter. So that's sort of something that we've been seeing as well. And of course, if people are on a prepayment meter and have paid off their outstanding balance, then we can kind of take them the other direction and look at if they're sort of ready to go on to a credit meter, or to have their smart meter changed to a credit mode. So the next few, I'm going to go into more detail on these in the next few slides, but we do, especially this year, the winter fuel payment, for reasons that fairly obvious. We have had an uptick in people with queries about that, and as part of our energy sessions, we always look at sort of maximizing income. We usually do a benefits check, so we look at things like sort of claiming pension credit. But looking at that kind of entitlement is something we help people with, as well as the priority services register and eligibility for that, and sometimes help with signing up for that. Again, I'll talk about that a bit more on the following slides. And then sort of the last or the next two of these are something that we also look at when looking at ways to reduce bills, or certainly to reduce the need for heating. So we have a lot of queries about sort of the energy efficiency of someone's property, questions about whether they can reduce how much they need to use their heating if they sort of get extra insulation installed, or sort of extra double glazing, that sort of thing. We've had a few queries about solar panels as well. As part of that, if they're eligible, we can also help with applications for energy assistance schemes, so things like the Energy Company Obligation Scheme, the Great British Insulation Scheme, Home Upgrade Grant, and the Boiler Upgrade Scheme, which again I'll talk about in more detail in a moment. Then again, I'm going to talk about this a bit more, but we are able to issue fuel vouchers for people who fulfill certain criteria. It is for prepayment clients only, and it is people in energy crisis only, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means in a second. Just talk a little bit about the winter fuel payment and the changes to that. If you were present at the winter fuel payment presentation that was done as one of these ReferKent spotlight sessions last year, I talked a little bit about the impact of sort of pension credit eligibility on the winter fuel payment. So you might recognise this slide, but just talk a little bit about it. So it's an annual payment to people over state pension age, and it's a payment of either £200 or £300, depending on the age of the recipient. You might hear some people refer to it as a £500 or I think £600 payment over the last couple of years. That was because of the pensioner cost of living payments, which were an extra £300. I think it might have been £200. So apologies if I've got that mixed up. But that's no longer being paid out, so it is back to sort of a regular £200 or £300. And couples receive £200, £300 based on the age of the older person in the couple. The key thing is that as of this year and this winter, the payments is now limited to recipients of means-tested benefits, and then the main one really being pension credit. Although if the possible recipients are in what's called a mixed stage couple, that means one person over state pension age and one person below state pension age, they can still receive a winter fuel payment, even if they're on something like universal credit or any other form of means-tested benefits. So as long as they're in a mixed stage couple, because even though they would have to stay on the means-tested benefits for people below state pension age, they could still get the winter fuel payments. So that's that, and then the warm home discount scheme as well, which doesn't really change too much, although it's certainly a bit different than it was a few years ago. So that's an annual payment of £150 paid towards the electricity bill of eligible recipients. In terms of who gets it, again, it's if you receive the guaranteed element of pension credit, you'll receive the warm home discount payment automatically. If you don't receive that, then you can still receive it if you A, receive means-tested benefits, and B, fulfill the high energy cost score criteria of the government. And that sort of depends mostly on the size and the age of the property. So generally it's the older and the bigger the property, the more likely you'll fulfill that criteria. And for those who are eligible, and it's the same thing I should mention with the winter fuel payment, so that there's no need to apply. However, in a small number of cases, for whatever reason, eligible recipients won't receive a payment, and in which case they'd need to contact the warm home discount helpline, and of course that's something that we help with. For the warm home discount, there is a calculator you can look at. We try to do it with all of our clients who are likely to be eligible, and that should tell you it'll either tell you if you are eligible or you aren't, or it will say, we're not sure, you'll need to call the warm home discount helpline. It's usually fairly straightforward to do that, and then that's a good way to find out. And I mentioned briefly earlier the Priority Services Register. So this is a scheme that doesn't offer anything financial, but it does offer a number of useful services for people who fulfill, or energy customers who fulfill certain eligibility criteria. So main ones being sort of having long-term health conditions, looking after dependent children, being over state pension age, or being a carer. You can also, I think most energy companies have eligibility for people who for whom English isn't a first language. And it just means basically that the energy company is aware of someone's circumstances. It's something that's run by every energy company and also the distribution network operators. So for Kent, for electricity, that would be UK Power Networks, and for gas, that would be the Gas Safety Network. And just to give an idea of the kind of services it provides, so if there's going to be a power cut, if they have, if it's something that they're aware is going to happen before it happens, they would send out prior warning to people on the priority services register, and certainly those with long-term health conditions would be a priority to be reconnected. There's also a password protection scheme for, so if the energy companies send anybody out to do a sort of a home visit, that person will have to state a pre-agreed password, and that's quite good, especially if you have someone who's for whatever reason is concerned about people they don't know coming into their home. They can also make alterations to correspondence to help sort of improve accessibility to that for people who are sight or hearing impaired. For example, printing bills in a larger font or in Braille, and sort of making sure that the correspondence method is the one that works best for the customer. And also for households on low incomes, they can also provide free annual gas appliance safety checks. Obviously, most of these would generally be sort of organised. If someone lives in privately rented property or property rented from a housing association or the council, it would be organised by their landlords. But we do find sometimes that, especially people who own their own property, this can be a really important thing. I mean, we suggest people get a gas appliance safety check once a year, and this is a way to organise that without people on low incomes having to sort of find the money to get that sorted out. So that's just a flavour of what they offer. I mean, there's actually a huge amount of things that they can do. So it's always worth, if you are speaking with somebody who sort of might need some kind of assistance in some way, just speaking with the energy company. It can also be signed up for online as well if there's any difficulties actually calling through and asking to be placed on the energy company's priority services register. So it's very much something worth looking into if you're speaking with someone who's likely to be eligible. Now, just before I get on to this as well, I do just want to mention a couple of schemes that are being run by Kent County Council at the moment. That are useful, and the reason I haven't put them on these slides is just because these are, as I understand, well, time limited, but also funding limited. So I don't know sort of how much longer they have to run, but I know firstly for people who were or used to receive winter fuel payments, but now fall above the threshold to claim pension credit. The Kent County Council are currently running a scheme called the Pensioner Just Missing Out scheme. I believe I've got the name right there, which can provide a sort of an amount to help people. And then there's also the I believe the name of it is the Winter Food and Energy Support Scheme, which can send out a £100 voucher either for a supermarket voucher or for energy, or a combination of both. And that's also available for people in Kent who have low income. So worth looking into those if you're helping someone who's struggling, and of course that's something that we can try and help with as well if you want to refer them our way. And I'll talk about how to do that in a moment. But just talk a bit about the energy efficiency schemes. So these are really just for homeowners, although people who rent privately can always speak to their landlord about these as well. If someone lives in a council or a housing association property, usually those housing associations or the councils would have their own schemes. So if you are sort of helping anyone in that situation, then worth speaking to the sort of the housing association or the council to see what can be done. But for people who own homes or rent privately and sort of are able to or on speaking terms with their landlords, I should say, then these are potentially available. So firstly, there's the Energy Company Obligation Scheme, which has been around for quite a long time, which is an energy company sort of run scheme which can provide funding to help cover the cost of multiple energy efficiency measures, and it's specifically available for people on low incomes and with properties with energy performance certificates with the energy efficiency ratings of D and below. Most energy companies will only provide them to their own customers. I think there are a few who can provide them to customers of other companies as well. So it's worth having a check on that. There's also the home upgrade scheme, which is quite similar in some ways. So this is a sort of a local council run scheme for energy efficiency improvements. I think each council has their own sort of name for their own scheme. This is specifically only available for properties that don't use a mains gas heating system. And again, it's available for those with low incomes and energy efficiency ratings of D or below. Certainly if the eco scheme isn't possible, then always worth checking with your local council. There's also the Great British Insulation Scheme, which is specifically for cavity wall or loft insulation that provide funding to help cover the cost of that. And again, I don't believe the income thresholds apply for that, but I'm not 100%, but I don't believe they do. But it is only available for people with energy efficiency ratings of D or below. And then finally, there's the boiler upgrade scheme, which is a scheme to cover sort of a part of the cost of replacing a fossil fuel heating system with something like an air source or ground source heat pump or a biomass boiler. Obviously, there's more information on any of those available on gov.uk, but very much worth looking into if you do have somebody whose property is, who owns their own home or rents privately and has a property that that needs some form of energy efficiency measure to help improve that side of things. Now, just to talk about the kind of thing we can offer, because I mentioned fuel vouchers before. I mean, we work closely with the Fuel Bank Foundation, who are a very good charitable organisation that can provide help to people in energy crisis, and that's sort of the key thing. And when we say energy crisis, we mean people who, in the case of fuel vouchers, who are off supply or imminently off supply on their prepayment meters and cannot top up for quite a while. And we actually have to check that. They actually have to send in pictures of their meter showing a low or a zero balance. So these vouchers are one-off vouchers, and they, in terms of the value of them, they do fluctuate each month. The Fuel Bank Foundation tries to set them at a value that reflects the cost, I believe, of 1 week's, I can't be 1 week's worth, but it's basically they become a higher value in the winter months. So the ones this month are £76, and they fluctuate depending on the month of the year and how cold it is and that sort of thing. If somebody wants one of these, we are required to go for a full sort of energy advice appointment, look into ways to reduce their usage, behavioural changes that could obviously reduce how much they spend on their energy costs. We look at ways to maximise income, because the idea really is that these are one-off vouchers just to get people through a crisis, and that people wouldn't come back to us again. Obviously, occasionally that does happen, and occasionally we can provide more than one. But generally, we try to generally they are supposed to be just one-offs, to provide people with time to get the advice they need to not be in that situation again, ideally. We also have assistance from the Fuel Bank Foundation with something called the Heat Fund. So this is for people on what we call alternative heating sources. So basically not gas or electricity. So this could be anything like oil, liquid petroleum gas, coal, wood, anything along those lines. The Heat Fund can provide a grant of up to £500 to help clients who are sort of running low on their particular fuel source and have no way of topping up and have taken all the appropriate steps to sort of maximise their income and lower their outgoings. And again, we go through all of that with them. We would need to put together a budget plan and sort of do all the things that we'd usually do when applying for a grant of this size, just to make sure that they are, again, in what we call an energy crisis. That is to say that they are likely to be off supply for a long period of time without our intervention. And again, it's really just supposed to be something to help people get through a crisis situation. while allowing them to get the advice they need to make sure they don't get into that situation again. But if there's anyone who you work with or who who might be sort of in that situation, please do refer them our way. So now just talk about the projects we run. So we currently are running 4 projects out of the SINS Advice in North and West Kent. First is sort of our kind of bread and butter, which is our energy advice project. So these are one-to-one energy advice sessions carried out by one of our specialist energy advisors. And these can be either, well, most of them are done via phone. We can do them in person at one of our offices if doing them via the phone doesn't work. And we can do them by email as well. And it's sort of just helping people with kind of all the things that covered in that initial slide, or any other issues that they bring to us that sort of energy-wise. So that's that. And then we've also got our energy outreach project, where we go out into the community and deliver talks or attend stall events or sort of run drop-in cafes, that kind of thing, to community groups. And it's very much a way of us literally reaching out to our sort of local communities, so that they don't have to seek us out, but we sort of reach them and engage with them, and hopefully make sure people know that we're there, and make sure that any sort of barriers to using our service, we can hopefully try and break those down and make sure that sort of anyone can come and see us. And then we also have our carbon monoxide advice project. So we sort of plaster these posters everywhere. It's sort of a one-to-one carbon monoxide awareness and safety advice, which again can be provided via phone or in person if necessary. I mean, often when we go to events, we'll and someone says they're interested, we'll sort of quickly go through all the things we need to go through with them there and then. I think this is something that really is quite important. I mean, I believe that in terms of the numbers of people who die from carbon monoxide poisoning each year in the UK, I think it's still around 40 to 50 people, and thousands of people get ill from carbon monoxide poisoning, which then, I mean, fortunately, obviously, vast majority survive, but a lot of them have to go into hospital and have to sort of get a lot of treatment there, which then sort of adds to the amount of demand on the NHS. So if we can obviously help try and prevent people getting sick and that sort of thing, then that has quite a good knock-on effect. As part of that, we can provide free carbon monoxide detectors to anyone who needs one. It is one detector per client, but there's no other eligibility criteria. So that's obviously quite an important thing. So that's that. And then right, so let me move on to what is sort of a brand new project we started at the beginning of 2025, which I've talked to a few people about, but obviously I want to try and make sure we can reach as many people as possible. Now, this is called our Energy Casework Outreach Project, and the aim is to provide one-to-one energy advice, either as a one-off or even sort of in-depth for casework advice to clients via community venues. So it's sort of a mixing our kind of one-to-one specialist energy advice with our outreach. And we're specifically, as part of this project, trying to reach clients from underrepresented communities or with vulnerabilities or from areas of high deprivation. I mean, obviously we'll try and help anybody, but we're really sort of trying to reach out to those who either really need the help or who might otherwise not sort of seek advice from us. And so the way this would work would be that sort of a community venue or a community group would basically host one of our energy advisors on a specialist energy advisors on a day or a time that works for them, and that could be either on a one-off or an ongoing basis. And then we can provide follow-up help either at the same location or via the phone or via email. And I should mention, I mean, we just do this for our area, which I mentioned at the start. So Dartford, Gravesham, Sevenoaks, Tunbridge and Tunbridge Wells. I believe some of the other SINS Advice offices in Kent are running something similar. I know I know Sins of Ice Swale are, because saw a couple of their advisors in sort of a meeting we had about the project recently. I don't know about the other offices. I know that I know Maidstone have a very good energy advice team, so I'd imagine they might be doing this. Canterbury do energy advice. I don't know about the other offices, but if there is anyone else here from one of the other offices in Sins of Ice offices in Kent who is also working on this project, please do sort of mention that in the Q&A afterwards. But the key thing is, for this project, if you're interested in hosting us, we would be delighted to come down and sort of see what we can do to help, or to have a chat and sort of see how we can make that work. So please do get in touch. I'll mention a few other ways of contacting us, but the key one, especially for this project, is to email us at energy@nwkent.cab.org.uk. So energy@nwkent.cab.org.uk, and we'll try and get back to you as soon as possible. As I said before, we can only provide the sessions within our own areas. However, other offices within Kent, other Sins of Ice offices within Kent might be able to provide something similar. So yes, please do get in touch, because we're trying to sort of reach as many possible venues and hosts as we can, and we'd be delighted to obviously try and fit in with sort of your timetable if you're interested. And then in terms of sort of more generally how to reach us and how to refer clients, so of course you can email us, as I just mentioned. You can also refer clients directly to us via ReferKent, of course. Additionally, you can visit one of our offices or one of our Kent advice hubs, which are all over sort of different areas of Kent. And you can find the locations of those either at our website, which is www.sinsofvicenwk.org.uk, or via the Kent Money Advice Hub website. They are just called Kent Advice Hubs now, but the website is still www.kentmoneyadvicehub.com. And of course, if all else fails, and hopefully we'd get back to you via one of those, you can also call our free advice line number on the 0808 278 7810. It does tend to get quite busy during the day. I can't promise you there won't be a wait time for someone trying to get through to us that way. Best times to call early in the morning or late in the afternoon. But it is, that's sort of another way to get in touch with us. And if it is a client with an energy specific issue, you go through to one of our advice line advisors who would then refer on to us, and we would get back in touch with the client. Good. Okay. Well, that's everything. So thank you very much for listening. That's just a thought to leave you with.
I think that's a good point to wrap it up. Unless anyone else has got any questions, just to say thank you to George for today's presentation, and thank you to everyone who's taken their time out of their day to join. So thank you all. Have a good rest of the day and productive week. Thank you, everyone. Bye now.
Thank you very much. Thank you.